So now I'm going to describe flip, and don't worry if you don't completely understand the first time. I'm kind of going to repeat a lot of the same topics. Here it is. This is what a flip simulation looks like, which is pretty great. It is, at its core, both things. It is a particle sim and a kind of a volume sim as well. So what we see here, though, the end result is points. Now these points do get turned into surfaces, as we talked about. So here's the same sim. Those points get turned into a polygon surface. We can also modify the polygon surface to make it look even better. That's a whole other thing. But again, essentially, this is a point space system. And in fact, flip means fluid implicit particle. Now, what does that mean, implicit particle? That's because it's not purely a particle-based sim. A lot of these points come and go all the time by the whims of flip. And what do I mean by that? Flip, in a nutshell, starts with points coming into the simulation and doing the best job that they can do. But as we know, when points hit a surface or they collide with the ground, as we saw in the earlier example, they would just bounce up. So what we realize is that we can't just rely on the velocity of the points doing whatever they want. What we need to do is to recognize that as a bunch of points pile up, either against a surface or against each other, that there is an idea of pressure there, and that pressure should modify the direction they're moving in. So here's a two-dimensional view of a particle sim moving through. Imagine this is just like a slice. The points move in, and they should just bounce on this thing and then bounce all the way back out. But instead what we see is they slow down and then kind of change direction, and then they find an opening, and then they change direction. You know, as a human being looking at this, you implicitly, you see this, and this makes sense to us. The water comes in, it kind of just finds the easiest way through it, and then, keeps going. And that's what flip is trying to do, is it says, take the particle's velocities, transfer it to, essentially, a temporary, like, pyrosim. Transfer those velocities into a volume, into not a volume that exists from frame to frame. Just do it at the last second. So, and think of it this way. The particles move on their own. And then we say, before you move into your next position, let's take all of your little individual velocities, rasterize them, or stamp them, or copy them, or however you want to think about it, into a smoke simulation grid. We can then smooth those velocities out. We can look for areas of pressure and have those pressure areas push back away out of the pressure areas to modify the velocities. Then from that whole velocity grid, copy those velocities back to the particles and then move the particles based on that. And then you repeat that every substep or every frame or what have you. Does that make sense yet? Probably not, but that's okay. So here's the same sim. Oh, there's some sirens. I hope you Applied Houdini fans can hear those sirens out there. 10:14 at night and still sirens. Anyway, so here is just a look at some of that, where we can see, as I said, as the particles come in, every single frame, we take the individual particle velocities, copy them into a voxel grid. So that's what these streamers are showing. These are showing velocities. Now, from the first bunch of frames, they are more or less just moving in the same direction. Now, when they get here, I have another visualization underneath it. That's showing pressure. You can see how the pressure builds up in corners, where basically all the points are getting caught. Pressure can build up pretty much everywhere, even not next to surfaces, because the particles are just going to bunch up against each other all the time. But the important thing to realize is that while these velocities were just pointing straight ahead, like so, once the pressure gets involved, it is pushing them, is redirecting them. It is basically applying velocities pointing outwards. The difference in velocity is essentially pressure. So if you can imagine velocities all pointing at the same spot, that's creating a high pressure area. And so what we try to do is apply velocities pointing out the other way to equalize it. We want the pressure to be equal everywhere. It's not always fully successful, but we're trying to get it to be as, equal pressure across the simulation as possible. What that's called in fluid dynamics is non-divergent, meaning the velocity vectors should largely be flowing in the same direction. In any given small area, they should largely be flowing in the same area. They should never be pointing at each other or completely pointing away from each other, which again, intuitively, as a human, you understand. We want wind to flow. We want water to flow. We want these flowy patterns that we get by considering pressure.